Good morning, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar on action planning, how to create effective and efficient goals. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. Some of you who are on a lot of our webinars are probably tired of hearing me say it. If you have technical questions about the operations of the webinar today, if you'll put those questions in the chat box, that would be great. And if you would put any content questions specific to what's being presented today, if you'll put those in the Q&A box. We'll also give you a reminder throughout as you're being asked for input. Also, your lines are muted upon entry. However, we ask that you go ahead and mute your line as well, just to be on the safe side. With that, I am going to turn it over to today's presenters.
Hi, this is Dr. Terry Rogers, and I am in this workshop really to assist Ree as she's presenting the material. The presentation will be done by Rhiannon Evans, and as Heike mentioned, please respond when we ask for responses from you in the Q&A box. So please respond when we ask for responses from you in the Q&A box. And this presentation is primarily designed for the agency tiered supports consultants who do tiered supports for agencies, and so that they can better assist agencies in developing action plans. However, it could be useful for anyone who does project planning and needs to do some action planning or who writes goals. So anyone could benefit from this. It's primarily designed for the ATSCs, but everyone's welcome. So without further ado, here is Ree.
Thank you, Terry. So most of this material comes from Robert Major's book, Goal Analysis, How to Clarify Your Goals So You Can Actually Achieve Them, as well as NERN Implementation Science Literature. So an action plan is a way to plan out how to accomplish long-term or abstract goals. So you can use this individually for your own personal goals. You can use this with your business for leadership goals or for project management, as Terry mentioned in the introduction. So would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? I don't care much where, so long as I go somewhere. Can you guys remember a time when you were asking the same question as Alice? Have you ever been wondering which way you ought to go to get someplace? Do you have a drawer full of unfinished ideas? Do you suffer from burnout? Do you have long-term projects that have you spinning your wheels? I'm pretty certain all of us can answer yes to at least one of these questions. So today I'm going to share with you a way to keep from having to ask those questions again. The first example here is when someone asks for directions on how to get somewhere and they say, oh, you turn left at the big red barn, and then you go down a little ways and you turn right at the Miller house, and then you're going to go straight and then you're going to turn left at the big oak tree. That's not very clear on where it is you're going. Whereas if you enter your destination into MapQuest and your starting point, you will get clear, concise instructions on how to get from point A to point B. So the point here is too many details are overwhelming and hard to understand, so it's important that we make sure we give clear directions like MapQuest or Google Maps or Waze would do. They give us clear point-by-point instructions on how to get from A to B. But first you need to know where you are and where you want to end up. Then the objective steps can be filled in. So agency tiered supports is adapted from the school-wide PBS model, which is based on the public health model. So for example, a strategy in the public health model would be vaccines to prevent diseases. So we are here to help you along the way. One of the principles of school-wide PBS and agency tiered supports is that it's coordinated by a leadership agency team, and there are 3 broad processes that we encourage teams to use to effectively guide their work make decisions, and sustain their efforts. Those are using data-based decision-making, problem-solving processes, and what we're going to talk about today, which is action planning. So the action plan will specify what needs to be done, who will do it, when it should be done, and it will facilitate evaluation to help you decide how you will know how well you have done. So probably the most important point you will hear frequently is that your action plan should be reviewed and revised regularly. Again, if you use the roadmap analogy when you are on a road trip, you consult a map regularly and make adjustments as your trip warrants. So if there's floods and the roads are blocked due to flooding or construction, you're going to have to alter your route. Action plans, again, can be used individually or for team efforts. They're a way to help keep you focused, and it's a fluid document that's actually used. So you can use it during meeting agendas to guide your meeting, or you can use it for your own personal development. Too often we think of doing something rather than the purpose of doing it. Action in that sense, Major says, is not the same as progress. Action is easy. Relating action to outcomes is more difficult, but is really necessary. So the problem and solution need to connect. We need to be figuring out what we want to accomplish first. So the first step here would be to examine what a goal is. Goals are where we want to be. They are often described in abstract, broad terms. For example, I want my business to be successful. What does that mean? Or our goal is to be a well-respected company. That could mean many different things. What are fuzzies? So fuzzies are those abstract terms that I mentioned on the last slide. So successful, what does that mean? So other examples would be understanding, knowing, appreciating, attitude, sensitivity, motivation. Those are all abstract terms. They all mean something different to me than they might mean to you. So today we'll discuss some ways to break that down into something more specific so we're all on the same page. So Dr. Rogers and Heike mentioned answering in the Q&A box. So this is our first question. I want you to identify which of these answers are fuzzies. Number 1, interview an applicant. Number 2, attain common goals with coworkers. 3, be a good employee. Or 4, numbers 2 and 3. All right, thank you guys for answering. Several of you got the correct answer, which is number 4. So the reason the answer is number 4 is because if you look at each answer and pick out what the fuzzy word might be, in number 2, attain common goals would be a fuzzy statement. What does that mean? And then be a good employee. Good is your fuzzy word there. What does it mean to be good? And then what are specifics? So specifics refer to performance or actions that anyone would understand what to look for. They're things that are clear and easy to measure. A common goal organizations have is for their staff to have a good attitude. That's a fuzzy. A more specific goal for those familiar with tools of choice is to aim for staff to have a 4-to-1 positive interaction to negative interaction ratio with other staff during meetings. Other specifics might include smiling often, writing a report, creating an agenda, calling a guardian. It's important to be able to recognize whether something is a fuzzy or specific behavior, which is something we can do. And I just included this comic here from Major's book because I found it interesting, because she's asking who's the fairest of them all, and the mirror says, well, that depends on how you define the word fair. Another way to think about specifics is if you were to say, hey, watch me do this. Hey, watch me be good. Would it make sense, or would it make you laugh? If your objective isn't something you can show someone, this could also be covert. It doesn't necessarily have to be a visible behavior, because if you have taught me something and you want to know whether that knowledge has been understood, then you could do a test, and that test would show you whether I possess the skill. So it could be covert or overt, but if it's not something you can show someone, then it is likely a fuzzy and requires further analysis to be included in your goal. It doesn't mean it can't be, it just needs further breakdown. So, hey, watch me be sensitive is a fuzzy. However, hey, watch me nod and pat Jerry on the back as he explains how his journal was stolen would be a specific. So here's another Q&A question. I want you guys to identify which are specifics. Number 1, say favorable things about coworkers. 2, work with enthusiasm. Or 3, respond to emails. And then 4, 1 and 3. All right, so the correct answer here is number 3, and I'm going to break that down for you guys. So when you're thinking of fuzzies, those are things that you can't really show. They're not specific, so we can't measure them. We don't know what might be meant. So in number 1, the fuzzy word would be favorable. What is favorable for me might not be favorable to you. And then number 2, the fuzzy word is enthusiasm. What is enthusiastic to me looks different than what is enthusiastic to you. Whereas number 3, respond to emails, we can all agree on what that would look like. And then the third item to think about when doing a goal analysis or creating goals and action planning would be outcomes. So outcomes are our destination. It's the result of working on those objectives to meet our goals. They can be overt, so something we can see, or covert, something like knowledge, which again requires a test to see. Either way, they are our measures. They're our evidence. It's important to know where you want to go first so that you can know where to begin. So look at what it is you want to change first, then write down a goal that aligns with the outcome. That's your starting point. Then list specific objectives or action steps that can lead you from the goal to the outcome. You want to remove any fuzzy objectives before moving to the decision-making process. This is the decision-making process. It's the model from school-wide PBS that has been developed, and we encourage you to follow it as well. So first we start by identifying a realistic outcome. What can we realistically accomplish in the time allotted? For example, Excellent Agency has identified the following as an outcome. 90% of staff will have positive interactions with coworkers during meetings. They identified the following as a goal. Staff will interact positively with each other. Next, you want to identify the current status, where they are at right now. For example, only 33% of staff engage in positive interactions during meetings. Then you would analyze where they are at. For example, identify whether staff are trained in how to have positive interactions, identify opportunities to interact. Then you would develop a plan. Excellent agency team learned that 20% of their staff were trained on how to have positive interactions. The team also learned that the average opportunity to interact was only twice per meeting. So the agency developed a plan to train all staff on positive interactions and to provide a minimum of 3 opportunities to interact during meetings. You would implement the plan and revise as needed, evaluate, and begin again. So the thing here is that action plans should be a fluid process, like previously mentioned. It's constantly consulted, revised, evaluated, and we recommend this be done monthly. So those action plans should be monthly achievable goals to avoid burnout, because if you just have long-term goals, you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So this is the first 2 steps, identify an outcome and review data. So we're going to walk through the steps to complete an action plan based on this data. Steps 1 and 2 really go hand in hand. The first step is to assess your agency's current reality by using data, or if you're not working with an agency, your individual reality by using data. Where do you want to go? What is your destination? It's hard to plan the steps to get where you're going if you don't first have an idea of where you want to go. If you're a tiered agency, 2 pieces of data that can and should be used are the asset and self-assessment survey. Those 2 instruments will give you baseline data, your reality, of where your agency currently is. So we need to look at that data. Where are we at? What is the data showing us about the outcome we desire to achieve? Based on this asset data, in the Q&A box, please respond, where would your priority be? What would your outcome be? Take a minute and again type that in the Q&A box. What would your priority be and what would your outcome be? All right, answers are still coming in, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So a lot of you guys said that the priority would be to increase positive interactions and relationships, so that would be your goal. And that could be done using a 4-to-1 ratio, implementing stay close, cool, random routine, things like that. And then some of you said your outcome would depend on what areas are lacking that feature, but that the outcome could be that 4-to-1 ratio, which is correct. So if your goal is to increase positive interactions, your outcome would be staff maintaining that 4-to-1 ratio with clients. Very good. The next step of action planning is to analyze the problem to determine your reality gap. So this is a discussion about what you want and what your surveys tell you or what your data tells you. So how are we going to get from A to B? So an example would be our current positive-negative data shows that we have an average ratio of 2-to-1. Ideally, we would like to have a 4-to-1 ratio. We might ask ourselves why we have a 2-to-1 ratio. Is it across the agency or specific to one home or location? Is it a staff training issue or an implementation problem? These questions would lead us into our next step. The next step is to develop a plan. So what do we need to do to get to the outcome we desire? Specifically, how are we going to get to where we're going? We suggest keeping objectives as small, monthly, achievable goals. Again, this will really help you avoid burnout, especially with those long-term leadership goals. So you want to look at possible goals. So for example, get all staff trained to competency and tools, have tools coaches in each home, ongoing monitoring of tools of choice implementation would all fit under that. Possible action steps, timeline, and resources would be to schedule a tools training or find one within 30 days, to develop agency coaches trained to competency within 90 days. Agency coaches use the positive-negative observation form to begin tracking interactions within 5 days of competency. ATSC coaches complete weekly monitoring of fidelity on tools of choice implementation within 30 days. And then artifacts and documents to evaluate that would be those tools monitoring forms. So maybe your competency checklist or your tools coaching tracker and your positive and negative data. Once you have taken the time to brainstorm a plan, you want to think about your action steps, the timeline you've set, the resources available to you, and the evidence that needs to be seen to indicate that those steps have been met. And you want to prioritize your goals. So what's the most important thing for you to complete realistically? And do some of the action steps rely on the completion of other action steps? So in this example, staff would have to be trained on tools before they could be coached to competency. This is just an example of what an action plan template might look like. It's not the be-all, end-all. You could use simple bullet lists. You could use other templates. There are many available online. If you are an ATSC, this is the template that we recommend you use. It has been updated recently as well to match what we're training you in this presentation, so please look for that on our SharePoint. If anyone else wants this template at the end of the webinar, let us know and we can get that to you. And then this is an example of what the action plan looks like filled out. Again, we can get this filled out version to you as well at the end of the webinar. So you know what you are referring to. Let's look at this sample and see what we notice. So some points to make would be that there's a place to put the date the action plan was last revised, so you don't get confused about what version you're reviewing and revising, since this is changed monthly. It is a living document. There's a section for essential components, starting with administrative support, participation, and leadership. There are columns for goals, steps, timeline, and resources, who is responsible, and a way to evaluate that. The goals and steps are very specific, and there is evidence in place, which would be a list of products or artifacts that are completed to let us know that the step has been done. This is a continuation of the last slide of what the action plan might look like with another goal. And then here we have a way to measure our progress toward meeting our goal. So we add up the total number of objectives, and sub-objectives count as an objective as well. So if you have a for A or B or C, those would each count as one. And the total number of objectives completed, you add all that up and divide by the number completed by the total number to get your completion score for that month. So I break it down by month so I can see each month what my progress looks like. So I only count in June the goals I have set for June. So this will likely never be 100% because as objectives are completed, you might be creating new ones. So it's not so much seeing that you have a 100% marker, it's seeing that you are completing action plan objectives. You are getting somewhere toward meeting your goal. Again, the action plan is a living document. It's okay to change the plan. We should constantly update the plan. If it stays the same, then that means we either have no goals or objectives, or we're not meeting our goals and objectives, and further analysis is required as to why. So we really need to understand what is causing changes to be made, why the changes should be made, and then making those changes. Monitoring and evaluating the action plan is just as important as identifying the goals and action steps. An action plan doesn't do you much good if it's never looked at, reviewed, or updated. Again, it should be fluid and living. Goals might be long-term, but objectives should be small and achievable monthly. This means we should be looking at our action plans monthly to update those objectives and add new ones as needed. It also helps the team make sure we're following the direction we originally wanted to go, or if you're an individual using this for your own personal development, it lets you know that you're getting where you want to go. Because if our goal was to arrive in Florida, we don't want to find out 6 months later that we're in Canada and we need to backtrack. We want to be looking at it monthly to make sure we're going in the right direction. Meeting an outcome can be overwhelming and daunting. Sometimes we get too eager and focus on moving to the next step without pausing. This constant go and no celebration also can lead to burnout. So take time to recognize when you meet your action steps, even if they are small ones. It helps you see that progress is being made. So think about those big projects that you've had to get done. What did you do when you were finished? Did you celebrate with coworkers, high fives, have a relaxed night out, or buy Sonic drinks for the team? Just what are some ways that you can celebrate your successes? And then again in the Q&A box, please answer, where are you at in the action plan process? 1, you've never heard of an action plan before this webinar. 2, you want to start a plan. 3, you have a plan but never use it. And 4, you're actively using a plan. So it looks like most of you are either a 4 or a 2, so you want to start a plan. So I hope that you found this helpful if you are wanting to start a plan or you haven't created a plan. And then if you're actively using a plan, maybe this will give you some ideas on how to be more successful with your current plan. So here's a little opportunity for you to practice. I want you to think about everything we've covered today and write down 2 goals on a piece of paper first. Write down 2 goals and some objectives that would fit those goals. And then when you're done, you can type that into the Q&A box. So take about 5 minutes to do this. All right, so I'm going to read off a couple of these awesome examples. So we have one. Kalen says increase data collection is his goal, and then his objectives would be to perform IOA with agency staff, which is inter-observer agreements. Sorry, we're trying to scroll back up to it. It disappeared. And then to provide reinforcement to agency for meeting monthly goals, so to praise or celebrate when they meet those monthly goals. And then his second goal was to increase positive-negative ratio. And his objectives are to send staff through tools training, provide ongoing coaching and day programs, and homes. So that's a really good example. Let's see. All right, we have an example from Jada, which goal 1 is to be able to observe all staff utilizing tools of choice. And the objectives within that goal are to complete staff training in all adult programs. And objective 2 is to ensure coaching is taking place on a regular basis. So I would take within those objectives and have like an A, B, C, and say for complete staff training in all adult program, have A, B, I will send 12 staff through tools of choice training this month. And then for objective 2, ensuring coaching is taking place on a regular basis, objective 2A could be develop a coaching tracker system in Excel or whatever electronic format you want to use. Okay. So excellent job, guys. Thank you. So in conclusion, you want to make sure that your action plan is useful to you. Your region, if you're an ATSC, you want to make sure it's useful to your region or your agencies so that you can make sure everybody is able to meet their objectives and goals. If it's not useful, it's not going to be used. You want to use your data to create your agency tiered support leadership team action plan for staff, individuals, families. You want to make it specific so that when you review it, you'll remember what your plan was. And you want to, again, review and revise it at least monthly. The habit of reviewing and revising your action plan will really keep it current and keep you and your team on the right track.
So this is Terry, and I think one of the most important things is your action plan objectives and steps. You need to have data that tells you, are you doing it? So are you doing the things you said you were going to do? And you need to have data that says, is it working? Is it getting you where you want to go? So if you say you want to increase staff's positive interactions, you want to make sure that you give them opportunities, that you have measurement of those opportunities and measurement of what staff are doing with those opportunities, and then that you're looking at positive interactions. So the reason you probably wanted to increase positive interactions was for staff morale or to have people practice so they are then able to be positive with the individuals. Thinking about that outcome or that ultimate goal of what do you want this to do for you, you need to then measure, is it doing that? So if you said, I want staff to be positive during staff meetings so that we can have better staff morale and more positive meetings, you have to think of a way that you can measure, is that working? So you might have a survey about staff morale. You might have people rate how positive the meetings were, but you need some way to say this this action plan is getting me where I want to go. So you got to measure, are we doing it? And you've got to measure, is it working? Okay.
Yeah. So now we just want to open it up to you for a couple minutes if you have any questions or comments you want us to address live on the webinar. If you do, please type those in the Q&A box. All right, so John is asking what role should take, or I think he's trying to say who should take primary responsibility for writing and maintaining the action plan. So that's really up to the agency team. It's their action plan. The ATSC is there to help guide that plan. They don't necessarily have to be the one to write it or maintain it. If they want you to, you are certainly qualified to do so and are able to do so. But if they want someone within their own team to write and guide that document, then you would just be there to consult with them on the process, on their journey.
However, as agencies are starting in the process, the ATSC does whatever's necessary to make that process go. So our job is to make it as easy as possible for the agencies. And that might mean you start out scribing the action plan as you walk them through developing it, and then you bring it back the next month for them and walk them through going through it until the person with the role of maintaining the action plan and reviewing it takes over that role. So ATSC's job is to be absolutely complete customer service while we're also walking them through being able to do it on their own. So we're about good customer service and making it as easy as possible.
Nikki says in the future it'd be helpful to see other comments and who is on the webinar, and I agree, but that technology does not exist yet. And then Amy says, do you recommend having an action plan with each goal listed, or just the monthly goals we want the agency to focus on, or both? So it depends on what does the agency want to see all of their goals lined out for the whole year, and then only focus really on deadlines for that first one or two goals. That's up to them. Or should we just put one or two goals on the action plan? It's really up to your agency and whether it would be overwhelming or not to see several goals listed out at once with several objectives, or would it be more likely to decrease anxiety or burnout if you just have one goal listed at a time? It's really up to the team. What do you think, Dr. Rogers?
You might have a big action plan that's the where we want to get at the end of this. Of course, tiered supports never ends because it's a continuous improvement process, but where do we want to be at the end of this year? Where do we want to be at the end of 2 years? You could have a big action plan like that, and then smaller ones that you're working on with monthly goals. There's so many ways that you could do this process that there's not one way we say should be done because it depends on the situation and the people involved.
Kana makes a really good comment. She says that as a person who's helped make these, she thinks it's important for someone who can easily gather the evidence, so that information, and then gather the action plan as well to maintain that and have a hand in updating it, and that's a good point. So when updating the action plan, whoever is sharing the data with you, or the permanent product of the coaching tracker or whatever should be involved in the process. We can go back to that, Heike. Well, we don't have any other questions at the moment, so if you guys think of any, our email addresses are right there. You can jot them down and shoot us an email, and we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you, guys.